your celebration of the literary arts here in Saskatchewan. Today, I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Dwayne Brenna. Now, Dwayne is a professor of drama at the U of S. He's an actor and a writer of nonfiction and fiction. His newest book, New Albion, won the Muslims for Peace and Justice Award for Fiction at the Saskatchewan Book Awards and was shortlisted for an M.M. Bennett's Award for Historical Fiction. Dwayne, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Danica.
Well, I'm really pleased to look at this collection of books we have on the table because it's very diverse. We have nonfiction, we have poetry. Let's start by talking a little bit about New Albion.
Sure.
So, and I've started reading it. I haven't finished it, I admit, but it's set in the theater. So this is something that you know well.
Yeah. Well, it started as research for a PhD dissertation, and I was, working on melodramas of the 19th century, and I came across this letter in the Theatre Museum in London. It was just a 2-page letter about written by a guy named George Dibdin Pitt, explaining his life and talking about his how he started in the theater and some of the plays that he'd written. And I got very interested in this character, and I found 2 more things about him. There was that 2-page letter. I looked up his death certificate at the registry in London, and I found out that he'd died of a drug overdose, basically, laudanum abuse. And then I found a newspaper clipping suggesting that he had absconded from his place of residence, stealing the bed sheets when he went. So those three articles were all I had of this guy, and I turned it into a 200-page novel. The guys on my old-timer hockey team, they heard about this character, drug abuse. He gradually loses his mind and eventually his life, and they're convinced that it's based on me. That's the sad part of it all. So.
Well, we'll just jump a little bit to one of the other books on the table.
Oh, sure.
Which is the baseball poem book,
Yeah.
Stealing Home. And,
Yeah.
and now these are actually about you. This collection of poetry.
Well, I embellish a little bit, but yeah, I have a lifelong love affair with baseball, starting, from about the age of 5. I can remember my dad hitting pop flies to my brother and I. I grew up on a farm in Nacum, Saskatchewan, and I can remember my dad hitting pop flies to us, out in the pasture. And I just actually it's a labor of love. I was at home looking after. I have 3 sons. Looking after my 3 sons, while my wife was doing a degree, and. I thought, well, I should write something. And so I just one day wrote a poem about baseball. And the next day I wrote another one. And I just kept writing. And about a year and a half later, I sent them to Paul Wilson at Hagios Press. And it was the quickest turnaround I've ever had on a book. Paul phoned me 3 days later and said, yeah, we're going with this book. So I think it was, baseball is quite saleable. It's now in its second printing, and still going strong. So I hope there's continues to be a market for it out there. I've sold it at sports days. I actually went out and played in an old-timers game in Riverhurst, Saskatchewan, about 2 years ago, and I sold 25 copies of my books. So I actually made money at baseball, which is hard to do unless you're a major leaguer.
Well, and it really is. I think it's so saleable because we don't have a lot of books of poetry about baseball. We have books of poetry about the prairies and about love and about relationships and other experiences. So it's what a fantastic idea you had with that. Now, do you have a poem you'd like to read to us?
I can read you one if you like from Stealing Home. It's just the first poem in the series, and it's called Ruts. What vivid anger drove him to this place to rail and vent against all innocence? Did a coach in Little League chastise him for a missed pop fly? A father shouted him for striking out? Was he bullied by some bigger kid who wanted shortstop to himself? Maybe he was sick of winter. That can happen in Saskatchewan. We're all as mad as hares when March is done. He drove his father's 4x4 onto the baseball field, cranked 360s till the ruts were deep as canyons, deep as creases on the face of God. Maybe others egged him on. His last indignity was leveling a corner of the home run fence. The old guys standing at the mound let slip their baseball gloves. Survey the carnage on the 1st of May. The sky is overcast. They look like sacks of winter-kept potatoes in their sweats. No one understands the punks, all hepped up on halo and designer drugs. It's inconceivable that anyone would drive a truck across the infield grass. Riggsy spits tobacco on the shale. These kids, they never could have played the game. The rest is silence, deeper than when worlds burn out. Tomorrow they will bring their hammers, nails, and rakes to fix this greenest patch of earth before the heavens break.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's, baseball is one of those things that even if you didn't play, there's a nostalgia to it. So
Yeah.
it's,
I find, that the book is bought a lot by young women for their aging fathers, about my age, who used to play the game of baseball and, who still enjoy poems about it, I guess. Yeah.
So let's go back to New Albion. So
Yeah, sure.
we have baseball, but theater is your other passion. And,
Yeah.
and you've made some interesting choices in the writing of this book. You've put it together as a diary, and tell me a little bit about the character who's your narrator in this book.
Yeah. The narrator is Emlyn Phillips, and he's based on actually there's a narrator, Frederick Wilton, in the Britannia Diaries, and it's basically his diary of working as a stage manager at the Britannia Saloon in East London, who I kind of patterned the narrator's voice after a bit. He sounds a bit Dickensian as well, but he's a nice man. This Emlyn Phillips, and he comes from a time when theater was being run as a family affair. And in the course of the 1850s, that started to change in London because of the coming of the railroad. You could have a large audience for one single play. And so theater producers in that time found that they could hire actors play by play instead of for a whole season, and pay them less, basically, for that. But that resulted in a lot of actors being unemployed, and that's basically what this story is about, the unemployment of Ned Farquhar Pratt as a stock playwright for an acting company in the period. But the novel, and Emlyn Phillips' part in it has to do with the necessity to be kind, the necessity to be nice, and that's an interest to me. And it was an interesting subject to work on, and very much, hearkening back to the works of, Jane Austen or Emily Bronte, where, when you write novels about people who need to be nice, and the need to be respectful and kind to one another, it harkens back to those writers a bit. So that's what Emlyn Phillips' work in the novel is all about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting voice, and it's interesting to see those places where he is overly dramatic in his description of people who are. It's like he's a very interesting. It's an interesting way to tell the story.
Yeah, well, I think he comes from Manchester, and so, and from a furniture factory profession back there is what his family's involved in. So he has a kind of he's in love with the theater, but he's also got a certain objectivity about it, and which enables him to describe it in his own language.
Well, Dwayne, that's all the time we have for today.
Oh, too bad.
Thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thanks, Danica.
I'm Danica Lorer, and this is Lit Happens. You can find past episodes by going to Shaw TV Saskatoon on YouTube. You can find me on Facebook or Twitter. And if you have a story that you'd like to share, I'm at danicalorer@gmail.com. Thank you.